Hello, everyone. I think we are live. Um, so,
Hello.
Hi.
okay. So, this is a new venture that we are trying here, and this is BC versus GP. I am Steve Endo, and I am coming to you from sunny Los Angeles. And Tanya?
I am Tanya Henderson and I am coming from Park City, Utah.
Very cool. And Gavin?
I am Gavin. I'm all the way from the UK, Manchester. It should be sunny, but it's raining, as usual.
Excellent. Okay, so we are getting together in order to discuss Business Central versus Dynamics GP. And I think the three of us all have many years of experience with Dynamics GP, so we have that as a reference. And all three of us are also learning Business Central, and we're at various stages of our learning. So we thought it would be cool to discuss some Dynamics GP features and what we know about those, and then learn about how BC does things related to those features, and compare and contrast, and kind of learn the product and the process. And today, Gavin is helping us discuss fiscal periods or financial periods. And let me just pull up that slide here, if I can figure out how to do that. One moment. Okay, so here I just put fiscal, financial periods, and period close. And in the US, we call them fiscal periods, but Gavin was explaining that in his UK localized version of Dynamics GP, it's referred to as financial periods. And also we'll be discussing the concept of period close and what that means in GP versus BC. So we'll show some of the, or Gavin will show some of the GP functionality. We'll discuss some of the BC functionality, discuss various pros and cons of each, and then talk about various business processes, like when is one feature better than the other or more appropriate, pros and cons, and also potentially discuss which features might be better for a small or simple business versus a large or complex business. And so with that, Gavin, do you want to share, I guess, the history of this, your blog post, the Twitter conversation that started all this?
Sure, yeah. So, like you say, I've been trying to learn. I've come from a GP background. I've been trying to learn Business Central for about a year. And so, as naturally, I try and contrast and compare the different features. As I'm trying to learn Business Central, I think, how does that work in GP? So, I've got a blog, the Dynamics Explorer. And incidentally, for GP people, that I don't know if you remember, it used to be the name for Smart List, and that's where I got the idea for the Dynamics Explorer, all the way back in the previous versions. So yeah, I was contrasting, and I thought that I'd do a blog post that shows the different features. So that got a bit of chatter on Twitter. So we thought it'd be great to set up these, go through it.
Excellent. Okay, cool. So do you want to show your screen
Yeah,
and present? Okay, let me switch over to
sure.
you. There we go.
So here's the post that I created, and basically it just goes through GP and how you can set up the financial periods and how you open and close them. And then I took some key takeaways from there and then compared it to Business Central. So basically, one of the key things with GP, as we know, is there's like one central place where the financial period setup resides. And what you can do is, one of the main key takeaways is that you can close and open periods for the different series or the different ledgers, if you like. So I can have my sales ledger or my purchase ledger open, and vice versa. And so for Business Central, that's not really the case. You kind of had a central place where you allow the posting from and to. So you set up like a date range, and then On that side, for a user, you can expand that range. So for example, in the screenshot from my blog post here, in the general ledger, I'm just allowing June postings, but from a user, I can expand that on a user basis to allow them to post into May and June. So that's something that's missing from GP, but in Business Central, I can't do it at a ledger level, a series level. So I can't leave my purchasing open and close everything else like I can in GP. So really, that's where that was my conclusion. Basically, I love the fact that I can control it on a user level in Business Central, but I also love the fact in GP that you can do it on a series. You can do it on a series or a ledger level.
And now, I guess one question I have is, in GP, we're used to financial periods, and we define those based on a date range. So if you scroll up to that screenshot of the periods, I know that period 1 is from, in this case, January 1st through up to February 1st. Now that is kind of a bucket in GP, right? Is there any equivalent for those actual periods in Business Central?
There is in Business Central. If I just go into Business Central, I'll just refresh. And here's where I hope that my Docker container works.
And I guess the reason I ask that is because if you're restricting the posting to date ranges only, I haven't looked into where those fiscal periods or financial periods are set up.
So basically in Business Central, you have something called the accounting periods.
Okay, great.
But this is not where you close them, although it looks like I could close them. It's my understanding.
Which is very confusing.
Yeah, it is confusing because from a GP perspective, I straight away went into this window and thought, all right, I can just close March off there. But that's not the case like in GP, so it gets confusing.
No,
and you click edit list and yes.
Okay, so it's a list and it's deceptive in that you think you can click on edit list, but this is really not the place where you close.
Notice in the
exactly. This is still
when you click on
out.
edit list, yeah.
So it's still grayed out. Okay.
Yep.
And so this you still essentially define financial periods here or accounting periods, but this is completely independent of a closing process.
That's right, yeah. Basically what you do is you go into General Ledger Setup, and here I can see that I'm allowing posting from the into February. So if I then if I check my user setup, which is an extra level, I can see that I'm just allowing this user to post into February. So if I then go into purchase invoices, this is a January invoice. So now if I try and post that, if I just do a preview, I'm getting a posting date is not within your range.
So it's restricted.
And Steve, what I normally do is if I have the manager who doesn't want their users to be able to obviously post to those periods, then the manager has access to the user setup, whereas obviously the users would not have access to that area. And I'm sure Gavin does the same thing.
Right. And,
yes.
So that is one thing that we were discussing is a lot of times, let's say the accounts payable manager is looking to close the period and do some final entries, or maybe it's the person who's doing the GL reconciliation. They don't want any other users to post to that period that is currently being closed, but they need to. So in GP, they have to sneak in, open up that period, do their postings, and make sure to remember to close it back off so that someone doesn't accidentally post that period. Whereas in Business Central, great feature, restrict those posting dates by user, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And GP, something you could do is use the mass close and only open that one task. But still, if somebody was doing that exact same task, you're right,
Right.
they could still do it.
Yeah, so payables transaction entry, if you're trying to post some invoices, late invoices to the prior period, you open that up. Any other user can post a payables transaction invoice to that prior period as well.
Correct.
Or even worse, in integration, which I run into that a lot since I do a lot of integrations. They want to close the period, but they want to make sure that integration that runs on the first or second of the month doesn't accidentally post the prior period. So, and
Yep.
the other thing about the Business Central date range, rather than just the on or off per financial period or accounting period, is that you can leave the last day of the month open. And so, at least in my experience, most customers, they're posting their closing entries on the last day of the month. They don't want anything in, previously in the month to be posted. So they can put the available posting dates to be the 30th or the 31st, right? Whereas it
Right.
closes off the 1st through the 29th.
Yep. And Gavin, I'm going to ask you this question. I think I'm pretty sure I know the answer to that, but maybe users out there don't know the answer. So if my posting date for my entire company is set up from, let's say, January 1 through January 31st, but my manager's gone in and put that I could post on the 30th, my user setting overrides the overall general ledger setup. Is that correct?
That's correct. So as you knew yourself, basically, so in the scenario I just gave, basically if I want to post this January invoice because it's a straggling invoice and we need to get it through, rather than go into general ledger setup, I just nip into user setup. Say, right, okay, I want to allow this to go through on the 1st, so I'm going to extend my allow posting for this one user for all of January and all of February. Come out of there, and now if I was to just do a preview on this posting, it would work.
Perfect.
So the other thing I thought might be interesting to mention is that I do come across, and I did another blog post incidentally, which was roughly the same time last year, which was I do come across scenarios where even though the posting date is within your allowed range, the system blocks you and says the posting date is not within your range of allowed posting dates. So even though your user setup is within for the document, it blocks you, and it's because of the way Business Central is doing cost adjustment. So I could quickly show you.
Okay,
so what I'll do is I'd go into my.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, we're just getting some audio break.
Shall I show?
Go ahead.
Yeah, can you repeat what you
Right,
said though?
okay,
I didn't hear
no
the
worries.
last part of it.
Yeah, so basically there's a scenario where, which I did a blog post on roughly the same time last year, which is where you get the posting date. You get a posting date error even though the document that you're trying to post is within your allowed range, and it's to do with cost adjustment. And the last thing I said is I could quickly just try and run through that if you like.
And so
Yeah, that'd be great.
In this case, a purchase invoice is posted, there's a behind the scenes additional cost adjustment entry that's getting posted. And the purchase invoice should technically be allowed, but the cost adjustment is for a different date.
Yes, that's right. So the scenario is we receive some goods, we will create a purchase order and we receive some goods, and then we sell it before we get the purchase ledger invoice. And then when the purchase ledger invoice arrives, maybe the next period, the next monthly cycle, the cost has changed. So what happens is when you post that purchase invoice, Business Central tries to rattle that through and do a cost adjustment on your cost of goods sold on your sales invoice to change it. Now, even though the purchase invoice that you're raising is within your posting range, it tries to change the cost on the sales invoice that happened a little while ago, and therefore it stops you and says you can't, it's not possible.
Got it.
And there's a way around it.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
So do we want to look at that, or what do you think?
I say yes.
Okay, cool.
Cool. So basically, I'll go into here, and I'll exit this purchase invoice. So what the scenario is, like I say, yes, so we're going to receive some goods, we're going to create a purchase order. In fact, first of all, what we'll do is we'll check our posting range. And we're going to do that. We're going to set that up for January. Oops, the daisy. There we go. And then we'll go back one. So our general ledger posting date is now saying we're allowed to post in January. We'll go to our user setup. This is quite a common, because I work primarily on support. This is quite a common thing to happen, which I thought it may be useful to show. So in my user is also saying that I'm allowed to post in January. So everything marries up.
Okay.
So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to purchase orders. Oops, a daisy. I'll do a new purchase order. What we'll do first of all, actually, we'll just delete this one very, very quickly. I'm just going to change my date to January. Right, so here we go. Let's go for it.
I think that's some wireless noise on your mic, Tanya. We'll talk about that before our next session to work that out.
Oh, can you hear it? I can hear it.
Yeah, one sec. Let me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's the lav. We'll work on it. Okay, so we have a purchase order.
Yeah, so I'm going to raise a purchase order for an aptly named item called cost adjustment test. We will do it in the main location. We'll do it for 1, and we'll say it's going to cost 10. So we'll release this purchase order, like so. And then what we'll do is we'll receive it as well. So I'll go post, receive, and there we go. So we've received one of this item. We'll then go and sell the item in January. So a quick sales order, or like there we go.
I see. So when the invoice comes in, if there's any type of variance, it needs to modify the cost of goods sold up for the sales order or sales invoice.
It does, yeah. And GP does the same, and does create a cost adjustment journal as well. But it kind of stops in a batch, whereas because it says you can't post because we've gone through the scenario of receiving it and then invoicing it in a different month. So in GP, you'd get a batch in your financial that'd say can't post because the financial period's closed. But because there's no concept of, in GP, we can switch off in posting setup, post through general ledger files and post to general ledger.
Yep.
We can't do that in Business Central, so it's an all or nothing scenario. So it has to do it. So because the cost adjustment is happening in a prior period,
Yep.
which isn't technically open for you, then it stops. So hopefully, with fingers crossed, this will actually work. So here we go. I'm going to sell it in. I'm going to sell it in. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to ship it, invoice that. We won't open that up. So we've got an invoice. We've got a purchase receipt and a sales invoice because we've sold it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go and extend our date in the general ledger. And we're going to say that we're allowed to post into both months, into January and into February. But on the user level,
Wow. This seems.
we're going to say that this guy has moved across into February. Like that.
That seems like a tedious workaround.
Yeah, this is just this is to show the issue more than anything.
Got it.
So and then what we do is we'll go back to the purchase invoice. Sorry, the purchase order. I do apologise. And the purchase invoice is now in the next period, so it's within my date range that I'm allowed to do. Let's just say it's on the 20th of February.
Okay.
And the invoice is XYZ 123. It's a miracle I haven't used that one before. So now we're going to try and post this. So it's going to say, right, okay, yeah, so this is within my range. Because, just to recap, if I go to my user setup, I'm allowed to post in February. When I go post to try and preview it, because I didn't change the cost, so it didn't have to do an adjustment. Sorry about that. So we're going to reopen. So we're going to release again. And we'll try and invoice it. And the posting date is not within your range. Because what's happening is it's trying to adjust the cost of goods sold on the sales invoice, which has happened in a previous period.
Yep.
So now this doesn't, and this kind of is common. I've seen this before. And it's where, Steve, you kind of picked up on it, where we said in the general ledger setup, what we'd always say is you'd keep those narrow. So if you move into, because so what key thing I didn't explain is what it tries to do is, because the general ledger setup is part of the allowed, it looks at the oldest date from in here. So it says, right, this is open, but it's the user's date that's stopping me. Right. So what you tend to do, if that's in February, it's going to let me do it. It's going to let me go and adjust, because it's going to post adjustment now from the 1st of February. I hope I explained that okay.
I mean, how? So a user will just see the posting error message, and then
yes,
a manager or higher level person who can control the dates, they need to open that up for the user.
Yes, they need to do that, or they need to realize that the general ledger setup needs to be up. I could have fixed that one of two ways. I could have extended the user's allowed posting from the 1st of January to the end of February, or I could have narrowed this down to the same as the users. My blog post kind of goes into it a little bit more.
Oh, so if you narrow down the general ledger setup posting date, BC will try to post that cost adjustment in February?
Yeah, so because this sales invoice is in January, what it does is, if the general ledger setup is also within January,
okay,
then it thinks, right, I can try and adjust it in January.
Right.
Because this is the allowed, in the general ledger setup, this is the allowed posting from.
Yep.
So now it's my user setup that's preventing me. If I change this to February, then what Business Central does is it goes, right, I want to change that cost in January. That's its first thing, but it goes, hang about, I can't, because of my allowed posting from is on the 1st of February. Therefore, I'm going to post it on the 1st of February.
Got it. Well, that's cool. That it sees the period as closed. Now, I guess is that? Let me switch back to our commentator view here. So, is that what a customer wants? Right? GP will submit an entry for January. BC will see that January might be closed, and it may create an entry in February. Aren't there implications for having that cost adjustment in February?
Well, if your
Yes,
January
because
is already closed, where would you post it? Oh, sorry.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess the question in GP is it creates the entry in January and it stops because it can't post. So it's up to you to make that decision whether you post it to January or push it to February, right? But in BC, it's
Right.
kind of automatic. I suppose I don't know what the implications are, how severe that is, but what do you think about that, deciding to put it in February?
see in GP, what it would have done, if you've done the exact same thing as in that scenario, what it would have done, it would have created the cost adjustment in January for the sales invoice, but it would have stopped because we'd have closed the period by ticking the box.
Right.
And then it's like you say, it's the controller's good choice then. No, I don't want that hitting, or do I open the period and allow it?
Interesting.
But does it post, Gavin? And I don't know this in GP. I'm sure if it's in GP though, is it going to post in the subledger in that month? And then it's going to get stuck in the general ledger, or it's just not going to post it either?
It just does. I've got the benefit, by the way, of running a scenario, so it's not. But when I ran through a scenario earlier, because I wanted to show this scenario with GP, it basically does the same as Business Central. It's just created a general ledger correction on the cost of goods sold, saying, hang about, when the FIFO cost on that sales invoice was £10 or $10, but you've got the purchase invoice now at 12, so I'll create a cost of goods sold general ledger entry,
Right.
and a cost adjustment. With Business Central, it does go that extra little step further because it creates a value entry for the item to show that the cost actual was different than the cost expected, and it created the GL entries off the back of that value entry.
But it does so, it tries to do so in January if January is open. If January is not closed in the GL setup, it can go to February on its own.
Yes, so if the date that it's trying to correct is open in the general ledger, then it'll try and correct it on that date, and that's where your user setup comes in. Because if your user setup's been restricted to just what, then it can't create it. And even though the purchase invoice is within your posting range, the correction isn't, so the whole thing fails. Because with Business Central, it doesn't go and create like a work journal that. So the process completes in GP, but the journal stops.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, that's why I was saying in GP, it seems like the subledger works, but the general ledger doesn't.
Yes. Yeah, Bob on. Sorry. Yeah, that's correct.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Any other implications for the differences between BC and GP? And how those fiscal periods are set up? Like any complications or things that a GP customer needs to consider if they're going to get things set up in BC?
I have one.
Okay, go for it.
I was going to say that on the GP side, you can close out that module that we were talking about, which we kind of touched on earlier a little bit.
Right.
But in Business Central, you're closing out basically all of the modules. So that's to me, that's a really big difference.
You can't keep the GL open for January, but close payables, sales, and everything, inventory.
Right. And I think maybe they've done it that way because people are more segregated. Like I have my AP person, my AR person, my financial person, and they should all have different roles. So you could do it at a user level, but we all know that sometimes you get one person that does it all, or 2 or 3 people.
Right. Smaller organizations.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, cool. Anything else? One thing you mentioned, Tanya, was the GP mass close feature. I don't know if we already covered that, but I don't think I have a screenshot of it, but
Do you want me to show you on my
yeah,
screen? I can share
yeah.
my screen again. Yeah.
Let
Yeah.
me switch to that. So, and we discussed that this is a technically neat feature in Dynamics GP, but we don't know how many people are actually using it. So, in addition to GP being able to close by module, it also, if you click on that mass close button, you can control at almost at the transaction type level what can be posted. So you can say that payables transactions or payables invoices can be posted in February, but checks cannot.
Yeah,
Correct.
And
I
so,
I
Yep.
set up a tiny demo of that as well if you want me to show you,
well,
because
I guess the
oh, I'm
question is
sorry.
that's really granular and it sounds
Extremely.
cool. I guess the question is, does anyone use it, right? So I definitely
I
know,
I was gonna
I know
say,
that customers use
yeah.
the by module. Do they use mass close?
I have had a customer who had a very large AP department. And so you had, these 10 people who were entering AP transactions, and you had two people that were cutting checks. So they actually, would close that out so that they could still print checks, but they couldn't necessarily enter invoices.
And
So,
that was by period. They couldn't control by user since GP doesn't have the per user restrictions.
correct.
And if they
Yep.
had per user, would that help? Not really, because they wanted to control transactions by period.
Right.
Okay, so perhaps a larger, more
A
complex.
particular type by period. Very
Got it.
complex. Yeah,
Got
GP
it.
is very, I think GP honestly is a little bit stronger than Business Central in that area.
Okay. But the ability to restrict by posting date and not just fiscal period, that's kind of a nice feature as well.
It is. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe someday the BC folks or BC team will add a few of these GP fiscal periods or financial periods features. Okay. Cool.
Or they'll tell us GP's Business Central's good the way it is.
Yes, yes.
Who knows?
And that's an interesting question. Are any of are any of these perhaps U.S. centric things? Like, are the features in GP U.S. centric? I don't know. I don't have enough exposure to international customers.
I wouldn't think so. I mean, I've had international customers who close out by module too. So I
What do you
wouldn't say
see,
that.
Gavin?
Gavin would know better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in the UK, are you seeing differences that are region specific?
Um, no, the vast majority of GP customers that I've dealt with love the way this window works. I think it would be a bit of a change for them to see the way Business Central works. I think they love the control, like Tanya said about being able to switch off, because sometimes purchase ledger might overrun a little bit and it's segregated in the organization, so they can close out
Yeah.
the sales but leave the payment run that needs to go through or things like that. That just crosses over. I do see when I log on this window with not like all the tick boxes all in one little box, something's unticked. So I can see that it's definitely used and users definitely like it. But the mass close was a great catch. I'd totally forgotten about that, and it was like a bing of lightning when when it was mentioned. Tanya mentioned it.
Yeah, it's a pretty impressive feature to be able to go down to that level and restrict entry by period.
I'm wondering if people don't use it because they don't know about it.
Right.
Like, I
Well,
mean,
that
how
window
many?
was actually, I was gonna say that window was brought out in the last upgrade of GP because they actually expanded the window so that now when you open it, you see the whole window. So I think that window actually got some love finally after, I don't know, 20 years.
Yeah.
So that button wasn't
Yeah.
as accessible or
No,
visible?
that button's always been there. People probably just didn't realize it.
Got it. Got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd completely forgotten about it. So I guess that points to many features in any system, right? People don't know about them, so they're using what they know, and they don't realize there's some other feature that could be helpful. Very common, right?
Very common.
Yep. Very cool.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else? I think that was a good discussion.
Yeah,
I
I enjoyed
agree.
that.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you. Thank you, Tanya and Gavin, and thanks everyone for watching. And we are working through the technical quirks of trying a three-person live stream from two states in the US and one from the UK. So it is a technically challenging process, but I think this went
And
fairly
Steve's
well.
doing amazing.
Yes,
Steve's
Yes,
I'm in
doing
the
definitely.
control
amazing.
room here trying to get everything to work, but I think we kind of pulled it off. But yep, learning experience. I think it went well. And if you have any other suggestions for topics, you can. Let me see if I can switch to that screen one moment. Come on. Okay, so let me just show this. You can get in touch with us on Twitter or via our various blogs and submit a suggestion on some features that you'd like to see compared between Business Central and Dynamics GP. So, with that, I think this was a success. Thank you both.
Thank you very
Awesome. Thank
much.
you.
Okay, and we are going to wrap up here. Have a good day.